There is a special place where adults with developmental disabilities can go to find a safe haven, a place of wonderful opportunities and joy. Project ID has social opportunities, meal programs, fun recreation, career development, church services, and the largest Special Olympic team in the state. Project ID is a real community treasure. Please be a volunteer, sponsor a member, or donate what you can to Project ID, Identity Beyond Disability.
Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. I hope you all celebrated it nice and quiet like we all had to do this year. So today we start a new book that will probably last us at least a few weeks, and I hope you'll enjoy it. This author was Norwegian, and we have seen it. You guys have probably all seen the story of our book. Our book today is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. So I'm hoping that the book will be a little different, or you haven't watched the movie a while, and you'll enjoy Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Here Comes Charlie is our first chapter. These two very old people are the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. And these two very old people, we'll see them in the next one, are the father and mother of Mrs. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandpa Georgine. This is Mr. Bucket and this is Mrs. Bucket. So you saw them right there. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket have a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. This is Charlie. This is Charlie. How do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do again? He's very pleased to meet you. The whole of this family, the 6 grown-ups, count them, and little Charlie Bucket live together in a small, very small wooden house on the edge of a great town. Ooh, that's quite a place, huh? We should be grateful. The house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable for them all. There were only 2 rooms in the place altogether, and there was only one bed. The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were old and tired, and they were so tired that they never got out of the bed. Grandpa and Grandma Josephine, Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine on this side, and Grandpa George and Grandma Georgine on this side. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket and little Charlie slept in the other room upon mattresses on the floor. In the summertime, this wasn't too bad, but in the winter, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. In the summertime, if we can back up just a bit, in the summertime, it wasn't too bad, but as we said, in the wintertime, there wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house or even one more bed to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family with a job. He worked in a toothpaste factory where he sat all day long at the bench and screwed the little caps on the top of the tubes of toothpaste after the tubes had been filled. But a toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money, and poor Mr. Bucket, however hard he worked and however fast he screwed on the caps, was never able to make enough money to buy half of the things that so large a family needed. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for all of them. The only meals they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for supper. Sundays were a bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had exactly the same, everyone was allowed a second helping. The Buckets, of course, didn't starve, but every one of them, the 2 old grandfathers, the 2 old grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all. And although his father and mother often went without their share of lunch or supper so they could give it to him, it still wasn't nearly enough for a growing boy. He desperately wanted to remember something more filling and satisfying than the cabbage and cabbage soup. The one thing he longed for more than anything was, can you guess it, folks? Chocolate. Walking to school in the mornings, Charlie would see great slabs of chocolate piled up high in the shop window, and he would stop and stare and press his nose against the glass, his mouth watering like mad. Many times a day, he would see the other children taking bars of creamy chocolate out of their pockets and munching them greedily. And of course, that was pure torture for Charlie. Only once a year, on his birthday, did Charlie Bucket ever get to taste a bit of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for that special occasion, and when that great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with one small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it, on those marvelous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned and treasure it as though it were a bar of gold. For the next few hours, he would allow himself only to look at it, but never touch it. Then at last, when he could stand it no longer, he would peel back a tiny bit of the paper wrapping at one corner to expose a tiny bit of chocolate. And then he was allowed himself just a lovely taste to spread slowly over his tongue. The next day, he would take another tiny nibble, and so on and on. And in this way, Charlie would make his sixpence bar of chocolate last him for more than a month. You guys ever made your candy last more than a month? But I haven't told you yet about the one awful thing that tortured little Charlie, the lover of chocolate, more than anything. This thing for him was far, far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in the shop window or watching other children munching on bars of creamy chocolate right in front of him. It was the most terrible, torturing thing that you could imagine, and it was this. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house in which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous in the whole world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by a man called Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there ever has been. And what tremendous, marvelous place it was. It had huge iron gates leading into it and a small wall surrounding it and smoke belching from its chimneys. And strange whizzing sounds coming from deep inside and outside the walls for half a mile around in every direction. The air was scented with the heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Twice a day on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory, and every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly, and he would hold his nose high in the air and take long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous chocolate smell all around him. Oh, how he loved that smell. And oh, how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like. Chapter 2, Mr. Willy Wonka's Factory. In the evenings, after he finished his supper of watery cabbage soup, Charlie always went into the room of his four grandparents to listen to their stories and then afterwards to say goodnight to them. Every one of these old people was over 90. They were as shriveled as prunes and as bony as skeletons. And throughout the day, until Charlie made his appearance, they huddled in their one bed all the time with nothing to do. But as soon as they heard the door opening and heard Charlie's voice saying, "Good evening, Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine and Grandpa George and Grandma Georgia," then all four of them would suddenly sit up and their old wrinkled faces would light up with pleasure and the talking would begin. For they loved this little boy. He was the only bright thing in their lives, and his evening visits were something that they looked forward to all day long. Often Charlie's mother and father would come in as well and stand by the door listening to the stories that the old people told. and the room would become a happy place for only an hour, and the whole family would forget that they were hungry and poor. One evening, when Charlie went to see his grandparents, he said to them, "Is it really true that Wonka's chocolate factory is the biggest in the world?" "True?" cried the four of them at once. "Of course it's true. Good heavens, didn't you know that? It's about 50 times as big as any other. And is Mr. Willy Wonka really the cleverest chocolate maker in the world?" "My dear boy," said Grandpa Joe, raising himself up a little higher on his pillow, "Mr. Willy Wonka is the most amazing, the most fantastic, and the most extraordinary coffee chocolate maker in the world has ever seen." I thought everybody knew that. And there's Grandpa getting very excited about telling Charlie. "I knew he was famous, Grandpa Joe. I just didn't know he was that clever." "Clever!" cried the old man. "He's more than that. He's a magician with chocolate. He can make anything he wants. Isn't that a fact, my dear?" And the other three old people nodded their heads slowly up and down and said, "Absolutely true, just as true as it can be." "Never?" And Grandpa Joe said, "You mean I never told you about the Willy Wonka and his factory?" "Never," answered Charlie. "Good heavens above, I don't know what's the matter with me." "Will you tell me now, Grandpa Joe, please?" "I certainly will. Sit down beside me on my bed, my dear, and listen carefully." Oh, and there's Grandpa Joe, all ready to tell tell Charlie. Grandpa Joe was the oldest of the four grandparents. He was 96 and a half, and that is just about as old as somebody can be. Just like all extremely old people, he was delicate and weak, and throughout the day he spoke very little. But in the evenings, when Charlie, his beloved grandson, was in the room, he seemed in some marvelous way to grow quite young again. All his tiredness fell away from him, and he became as eager and excited as a young boy. "Oh, what a man he is, this Mr. Willy Wonka," cried Grandpa Joe. "Did you know, for example, that he has in himself invented more than 200 new kinds of chocolate bars, each with a different center, each far sweeter and creamier and more delicious than anything the other chocolate factories can make?" "Perfectly true," cried Grandma Josephine, "and he sends them all to the four corners of the earth. Isn't that so, Grandpa Joe?" "It is, my dear, and to all the kings and presidents of the world as well. But it isn't only chocolate bars that he makes. Oh, dear me, no. He has some really fantastic inventions up his sleeve. Mr. Willy Wonka has those things. Did you know that he's invented a way of making chocolate ice cream so it can stay cold for hours and hours without being in the refrigerator? I want that. You can even leave it lying in the sun on all morning on a hot day and it won't go runny. "But that's impossible," said little Charlie, staring at his grandfather. "Of course it's possible," cried Grandpa Joe. "It's completely absurd, but Mr. Willy Wonka has done it." "Quite right," the others agreed, nodding their heads. "Mr. Wonka has done it." And then again, Grandpa Joe went on, speaking very slowly now so that Charlie wouldn't miss a word. "Mr. Willy Wonka can make marshmallows that taste like violets and rich caramels that change color every 10 seconds as you suck them, and little feathery sweets that can melt away deliriously the moment you put them between your lips. He can make chewing gum that never loses its taste and sugar balloons that you can blow up to enormous sizes before you pop them with a pin and gobble them up. And by the most secret method, he can make lovely blue bird eggs with black spots on them. And when you put one of these in your mouth, it gradually gets smaller and smaller until suddenly there's nothing left except a tiny little pink sugary baby bird sitting on the tip of your tongue. Grandpa Joe paused and ran the tip of his tongue slowly over his lips. It makes my mouth water just thinking about it, Charlie, he said. Mine too, said little Charlie, but please go on. While they were talking, Mr. and Mrs. Bucket, Charlie's mother and father, had come quietly into the room and now were both standing just inside the door listening. Tell Charlie about the crazy Indian prince, said Grandma Josephine. He'd like to hear that. You mean Prince Pachachari? Said Grandpa Joe, and he began chuckling with laughter. Completely dotty, said Grandpa George. But very rich, said Grandma Georgina. What did he do? Asked Charlie eagerly. Listen, said Grandpa Joe, and I'll tell you. Mr. Wonka and the Indian Prince. Prince, Prince Pondicherry wrote a letter to Mr. Willy Wonka, said Grandpa Joe, and asked him to come all the way to China and build him a colossal palace entirely out of chocolate. Did Mr. Wonka do it, Grandpa? He did indeed, and what a palace it was. It had 100 rooms, and everything was made of either dark or light chocolate. The bricks were chocolate, the cement holding them together was chocolate, the windows were chocolate, and all the walls and ceilings were made of chocolate. So there were carpets and pictures and furniture and beds, and when you turned on the taps of the bathroom, hot chocolate came pouring out. When it was finished, Mr. Wonka said to Prince Pondicherry, I warn you, though, it won't last very long, so you better start eating it right away. Nonsense, shouted the prince. I'm not going to eat my palace. I'm not even going to nibble the staircase or lick the walls. I'm going to live in it. But Mr. Wonka was right, of course, because soon after this there came a very hot day with boiling sun, and the whole palace began to melt, and it sank slowly to the ground. And the crazy prince, who was dozing in the living room at the time, woke up to find himself swimming around in a huge, sticky lake of chocolate. Little Charlie sat very still on the edge of the bed, staring at his grandfather. Charlie's face was bright and his eyes were stretched so wide you could see the whites around them. Is all this really true? He asked. Or are you pulling my leg? It's true, cried all four of the old people at once. Of course it's true. And you could ask anyone you like. And I'll tell you something else that's true, said Grandpa Joe. And now he leaned closer to Charlie until he lowered his voice to a soft, secret whisper. Nobody ever comes out. Of where? Cried Charlie. Wonka's factory, of course. Grandpa, what do you mean? I mean workers, Charlie. Workers? All factories, said Grandpa Joe, have workers streaming in and out of the gates in the mornings and evenings, except Wonka's. Haven't you ever seen a single person going into that place or coming out? Little Charlie looked slowly around at each of the four old faces, one after another, and they looked back at him. They were friendly, smiling faces, but they were also quite serious. There was no sign of joking or leg pulling on any of them. Well, have you? Asked Grandpa Joe. I really don't know. Grandpa, Charlie stammered. Whenever I walk past the factory, the gate always seems closed. Exactly, said Grandpa Joe. But there must be people working in there. Not people, Charlie. Not ordinary people, anyway. Then what? Cried Charlie. Aha! That's it, you see. That's another of Mr. Willy Wonka's cleverness. Charlie, dear, Mrs. Bucket called out from where she was standing by the door. It's time for bed. That's enough for tonight. But, Mother, I must hear. Tomorrow, my darling. That's right, said Grandpa Joe. I'll tell you the rest of it tomorrow evening. The secret workers. Do you guys remember who the secret workers are? I think I can even remember the song. The next evening, Grandpa Joe went on with his story. You see, Charlie, he said, not very long ago, there used to be thousands of people working in Mr. Willy Wonka's factory. And one day, all of a sudden, Mr. Wonka had to ask every single one of them to leave to go home and never come back. But why? Asked Charlie. Because of spies. Spies? Yes, and all the chocolate makers, you see, had grown jealous of the wonderful sweets that Mr. Wonka was making, and they started sending in spies to steal his secret recipes. The spies took jobs in the Wonka factory pretending that they were ordinary workers, and while they were there, each of them found out exactly how a certain special thing was made. And did they go back to their own factories and tell? Asked Charlie. They must have, answered Grandpa Joe, because soon after that, Figglegrubber's factory started making ice cream that would never melt, even in the hottest sun. Then Mr. Prodnose's factory came out with a chewing gum that never lost its flavor, however much you chewed it. And then Mr. Slugworth's factory began making sugar balloons that you could blow up to a huge size before you popped them with a pin and gobbled them up. And so on and so on. And Mr. Willy Wonka tore his beard and shouted, "This is terrible. I shall be ruined. There are spies everywhere. I shall have to close the factory." But he didn't do that, Charlie said. Oh, yes, he did. He told all the workers that he was sorry, but they would have to go home. Then he shut the main gates and fastened them with a chain. And suddenly, Wonka's giant factory became silent and deserted. The chimney stopped smoking, the machine stopped whirring, and from then on, not a single chocolate or sweet was made. Not a soul went in or out, and even Mr. Wonka himself disappeared completely. See, there's Grandpa telling Charlie all about it. Months and months went by, Grandpa Joe went on, but still the factory remained closed, and everybody said, "Poor Mr. Wonka. He was so nice, and he made such marvelous things. But he's finished now. It's all over." Then something astonishing happened. One day, early in the morning, thin columns of white smoke were seen coming out of the tops of the tall chimneys in the factory. People in the town stopped and stared. "What's going on?" they cried. "Someone lit the furnaces. Mr. Wonka must be opening up again." And they ran to the gates, expecting to see them wide open, and Mr. Wonka standing there to welcome his workers back. But no, the great iron gates were still locked and chained as securely as ever, and Mr. Wonka was nowhere to be seen. "But the factory is working," people shouted. "Listen, you can hear the machines. They're all whirring again, and you can smell the smell of melting chocolate in the air." Grandpa Joe leaned forward and laid a bony finger on Charlie's knee, and he said softly, "But the most mysterious of all, Charlie, were the shadows in the windows of the factory. The people standing on the street outside could see small, dark shadows moving about behind the frosted glass windows." "Shadows of whom?" said Charlie quickly. That's exactly what everybody else wanted to know. "The place is full of workers," the people shouted, "but nobody goes in. The gates are locked. It's crazy. No one ever comes out either." But there was no question at all, said Grandpa Joe, that the factory was running, and it has gone on running ever since these last 10 years. What's more, the chocolates and sweets it's been turning out have become more fantastic and delicious all the time. And of course, now when Mr. Wonka invents something new and wonderful and sweet, neither Mr. Ficklegrubber nor Prodnose or Mr. Slugworth nor anybody else is able to copy it. No spies can go in the factory to find out how it is made. "But Grandpa, who?" cried Charlie. "Who is Mr. Wonka using to do all the work in the factory?" "Nobody knows, Charlie." "But that's absurd anymore. He never comes out. The only things that come out of the place are chocolates and sweets, and they come out through a special trap door in the wall, all packed and addressed, and they are picked up every day by post office trucks." "But Grandpa, what sort of people are they that work in there?" "My dear boy," said Grandpa Joe, "that is one of the great mysteries in the chocolate making world. We know only one thing about them. They are very small. The faint shadows that have sometimes appear behind the windows are especially late at night when the lights are on. And those tiny people no taller than my knee, There aren't any such people, Charlie said. Just then, Mr. Bucket, Charlie's father, came into the room. He was home from the toothpaste factory, and he was waving an evening paper rather excitedly. Have you heard the news? He cried. He held up the paper so they all could see the huge headline. The headline said, Wonka's factory to be opened at last to a lucky few. Wow. The golden tickets. You mean people are actually going to be allowed to go inside the factory? Cried Grandpa Joe. Read us what it says, quickly. All right, said Mr. Bucket, smoothing out the newspaper. Just listen. Mr. Willy Wonka, the confectionery genius, whom nobody has seen for the last 10 years, sent out the following notice today. I, Willy Wonka, have decided to allow 5 children, just 5, mind you, and no more, to visit my factory this year. These lucky 5 will be shown around personally by me, and they will be allowed to see all the secrets and the magic of my factory. Then, at the end of the tour, as a special present, all of them will be given enough chocolate and sweets to last them for the rest of their lives. So watch out for the golden ticket. 5 golden tickets have been printed on golden paper, and these golden tickets have been hidden underneath the ordinary wrapping paper of 5 ordinary bars of chocolate. These 5 chocolate bars may be anywhere in the shop and streets of any town in the country, and even the world, upon any counter where Wonka sweets are sold. And the 5 lucky winners of these 5 golden tickets, and they are the only ones who will be allowed to visit my factory and see what it's like now inside. Good luck to you all and happy hunting. Signed, Mr. Willy Wonka. That man's dotty, muttered Grandma Josephine. He's brilliant, cried Grandpa Joe. He's a magician. Just imagine what will happen now. The whole world will be searching for those golden tickets. Everyone will be buying Wonka's chocolate bars in the hope of finding one. He'll sell more than ever before. Oh, how exciting it would be to find one. And all the chocolates and sweets that you could eat for the rest of your life. Free, said Grandpa George. Just imagine that. They'd have to deliver them in a truck, said Grandma Georgina. It makes me quite ill to think about it, said Grandma Josephine. Nonsense, cried Grandpa Joe. Wouldn't it be something, Charlie, to open a bar of chocolate and see a golden ticket glistening inside? It certainly would, Grandpa, but there isn't any hope. There isn't any hope, Charlie said sadly. I'll only get 1 bar a year. You never know, darling, said Grandma Georgina. It's your birthday next week. You have as much chance as anybody else. I'm afraid that simply isn't true, said Grandpa George. The kids who are going to find the gold tickets are the ones who can afford to buy bars of chocolate every day. Our Charlie only gets 1 a year. There isn't any hope. Grandpa George is kind of a downer, isn't he? The first 2 finders. The very next day, the first golden ticket was found. The finder was a boy called Augustus Gloop, and Mr. Bucket's evening paper carried a large picture of him on the front page. The picture showed a 9-year-old boy who was so enormously fat he looked as though he had been blown up with a powerful pump. Great flabby folds of fat bulged out from every part of his body, and his face was like a monstrous ball of dough with 2 small, greedy, currant eyes peeking out onto the world. The town in which Augustus Gloop lived, the newspaper said, had gone wild with excitement over their hero. Flags were flying from all the windows. Children had been given a holiday from school, and a parade was being organized to honor the famous youth. I just knew Augustus would find a gold ticket, said his mother when told the newspaper men. He eats so many bars of chocolate every day that it was almost impossible for him not to find one. Eating is his hobby, you know. That's all he's interested in. But still, that's better than being a hooligan and shooting off zip guns and things like that with his spare time. And I always say, if he wouldn't go on eating like he does unless he needed nourishment, would he? It's all the vitamins anyway. What a thrill it will be for him to visit Willy Wonka's marvelous factory. We're just as proud as anything. Oh, there's Augustus and his mama. He does have a little extra weight, doesn't he? What a revolting woman, said Grandpa Josephine. And what a repulsive boy, said Grandma Georgina. Only 4 tickets left, said Grandpa George. I wonder who'll get those. And now the whole country, indeed the whole world, seems suddenly to be caught up in a mad chocolate buying spree. Everybody searching frantically for those precious remaining tickets. Fully grown women were seen going into the sweet shops and buying 10 Wonka bars at a time, then tearing off the wrappers on the spot and peering eagerly underneath for a glint of gold paper. Children were taking hammers and smashing their piggy banks. And a famous gangster robbed a bank of £1,000 and then spent the whole lot on Wonka bars the same afternoon. And when the police entered his home to arrest him, they found him sitting on the floor amidst mountains of chocolate, ripping off the wrappers with a blade of a long dagger. In far-off Russia, a woman called Charlotte Roos claimed to have found the second ticket, but it turned out to be a clever fake. And the famous English scientist, Professor Foulbody, invented a machine which could tell you at once, without opening the wrapper of the bar of chocolate, whether or not there was a gold ticket hidden underneath it. The machine had a mechanical arm that shot out with tremendous force and grabbed hold of anything that had the slightest bit of gold inside it. And for a moment, it looked like the answer to everything. But unfortunately, while Professor was showing off the machine to the public at the sweet counter of a large department store, the mechanical arm shot out and grabbed for a gold filling in the back tooth of a duchess who was standing nearby. There was an ugly scene, and the machine was smashed by the crowd. Oh dear, if only she knew they were going to jump into her teeth. Suddenly, on the day before Charlie Bucket's birthday, the newspapers announced that the second golden ticket had been found. The lucky person was a small girl called Veruca Salt, who lived with her rich parents in a great city far away. Once again, Mr. Bucket's evening news carried a big picture of the finder. She was sitting between her beaming father and mother in the living room of their house, waving the golden ticket above her head and grinning from ear to ear. Veronica's father, Mr. Salt, had eagerly explained to the newspapermen exactly how the ticket was found. You see, boys, he said, as soon as my little girl told me that she simply had to buy one of those golden tickets, I went into town and I started buying all the Wonka bars I could lay my hands on. Thousands of them I must have bought. Hundreds of thousands. Then I had them load me into the trucks and sent directly to my own factory. I'm in the peanut business, you see, and I've got about 100 women working for me over in my place, shelling peanuts for roasting and salting. That's what they do all day long. Those women say, from now on, you can stop shelling peanuts and start shelling wrappers off these chocolate bars instead. And they did. I had every worker in the place yanking the paper off the chocolate bars full of speed ahead from morning till night. 3 days went by and we had no luck. Oh, it was terrible. My little Veruca got more and more upset each day, and every time I went home, she would scream at me, "Where's my golden ticket? I want my golden ticket." And she would lie for hours on the floor, kicking and yelling in the most disturbing way. Well, I just hated seeing her unhappy like that, so I vowed I would keep up the search until I'd found what she wanted. And suddenly, on the evening of the 4th day, one of my women workers yelled, "I've got it, a golden ticket!" And I said, "Give it to me quick." And she did. And I rushed home and gave it to my darling Veruca, and now she's all smiles, and we have a happy home again. Oh, that's even worse story than the fat boy. said Grandma Josephine. She needs a really good spanking, said Grandma Georgina. I don't think that girl's father is quite fair, Grandpa. Do you? Charlie muttered. He spoils her, Grandpa Joe said, and no good can ever come from spoiling a child like that, Charlie. You mark my words. Come to bed, my darling, said Charlie's mother. Tomorrow's your birthday, and don't forget that I expect you to be up early to open your present. A Wonka chocolate bar, cried Charlie. Is it a Wonka bar? It is, isn't it? Yes, my love, his mother said. Of course it is. Oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if I found the golden ticket inside it, Charlie said. Bring it here when you get it, Grandpa Joe said. Then we can all watch you taking off the wrapper. Charlie's birthday. Happy birthday, cried the four old grandparents as Charlie came into their room early the next morning. Charlie smiled nervously and sat down on the edge of the bed. He was holding his present, his only present, very carefully in his two hands. Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Marl Delight, it said on the wrapper. Whoa, that's quite a name. The four old people, two at the end of either end of the bed, propped themselves up on their pillows and stared anxiously at the bar of chocolate in Charlie's hands. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket came in and stood at the foot of the bed watching Charlie. The room became silent. Everybody was waiting now for Charlie to start opening his present. Charlie looked down at the bar of chocolate. He ran his fingers slowly back and forth along the length of it, stroking lovingly, and the shiny paper wrapper made little sharp crackly noises in the quiet room. Then Mrs. Bucket said gently, "You mustn't be too disappointed, my darling, if you don't find what you're looking for underneath that wrapper. You really can't expect to be as lucky as all that." "She's quite right," Mr. Bucket said. Charlie didn't say anything. "After all," Grandma Josephine said, "in the whole world there are only 3 tickets left to be found." "The thing to remember," Grandma Georgine said, "is whatever happens, you will still have a bar of chocolate." "Wonka's Chocolate Scrumptious Fudge Marlowe Delight," cried Grandpa George. "It's the best of them all. You'll just love it." "Yes," whispered Charlie, "I know." "Just forget all about those golden tickets and enjoy the chocolate," Grandpa Joe said. "Why don't you do that?" They all knew it was ridiculous to expect this one poor little bar of chocolate to have a magic ticket inside, and they were trying gently and kindly as they could to prepare Charlie for the disappointment. But there was one other thing the grown-ups also knew, and it was this, that however small the chance might be of striking lucky, the chance was there. The chance had to be there. This particular bar of chocolate had as much chance as any other at having a golden ticket, right? And that's why all of the grandparents and parents in the room were actually just as tense and excited as Charlie was, although they were pretending to be very calm. "You'd better go ahead and open it up, or you'll be late for school," Grandpa Joe said. "You might as well get it over with," Grandpa George said. "Open it, my dear," Grandma Georgina said. "Please open it. You're making me jumpy." Very slowly, Charlie's fingers began to tear open one small corner of the wrapping paper. The old people in the bed leaned forward, craning their straggly necks. Oh, look at them, looking at Charlie, so excited. Then suddenly, as though they couldn't bear the suspense any longer, Charlie tore the wrapper right down the middle and onto his lap. There fell a light brown, creamy-colored bar of chocolate. There was no sign of a golden ticket anywhere. "Well, that's that," said Grandpa Joe brightly. "It's just what we expected." Charlie looked up. 4 kind old faces were watching him intently from the bed. He smiled at them, a small, sad smile. And when he shrugged his shoulders and picked up the chocolate bar and held it out to his mother, he said, "Here, Mother, have a bit. We'll share it. I want everybody to taste it." "Certainly not," his mother said. And all the others cried, "No, no, we wouldn't dream of it. It's all yours." "Please," begged Charlie, turning around and offering Grandpa Joe a bit, but neither he or anyone else would take a tiny bit. "It's time to go to school, my darling," Mrs. Bucket said, putting an arm around Charlie's skinny shoulders. "Come on, or you'll be late." All right, let's see what time it is as the book goes. All right, we're going to read just a couple more pages till the next chapter, and then we will end. 2 more gold tickets found. That evening, Mr. Bucket's newspaper announced that the finding of not only the 3rd golden ticket was the 4th one as well. 2 gold tickets found today, screamed the headlines. Only 1 more left. All right, said Grandpa Joe. Then the whole family gathered in the old people's room after supper. Let's hear who found them. "The 3rd ticket," read Mr. Bucket, holding the newspaper up close to his face because his eyes were bad and couldn't afford glasses. "The 3rd ticket was found by Miss Violet Beauregard." There was a great excitement in the Beauregard house, and when our reporter arrived to interview the lucky young lady, the cameras were clicking and flashbulbs were flashing, and people were pushing and jostling and trying to get a chair in the living room, waving. The famous girl was standing on a chair in the living room, waving the gold ticket madly at arm's length, as though she were flagging a taxi. She talked very fast and very loudly to everyone, but it was not easy to hear all of that because she was chewing so ferociously on a piece of gum at the same time. There she is. Boy, those teeth look like she's been chewing a lot of gum, doesn't it? "I'm a gum chewer normally," she shouted, "but when I heard about these ticket things of Mr. Wonka's, I gave up my gum and started on chocolate bars in the hope of striking lucky. Now, of course, I'm back in the gum. I just adore gum. I can't do without it. I munch it all day long except for a few minutes at mealtime when I take it out and stick it behind my ear for safekeeping. Ew. To tell you the truth, I simply wouldn't feel comfortable if I didn't have that little wedge of gum to chew on every moment. I really wouldn't. My mother said it's not ladylike, and it looks ugly to see a girl's jaws going up and down like mine do all the time, but I don't agree. And who's she to criticize anyway? Because if you ask me, I'd say that her jaws are going up and down almost as much as mine from just yelling at me every minute of the day." "All right, mother, keep your hair on," Miss Beauregard shouted. "And now," she went on, turning to the reporters again, "it may interest you to know that this piece of gum I'm chewing right now at this moment is one I've been working on for over 3 months solid. That's a record, that is. I've beaten the record held by my best friend, Miss Cornelia Princemeadow, and she was furious. It's my treasured possession now, this piece of gum. At night, I stick it to the end of the bedpost, and it's good as new in the morning. A bit hard at first, maybe, but it soon softens up again after I've given a few good chews. Before I started chewing for the world record, I used to change my piece of gum every day. I used to do it in our lift on the way home from school. Why the lift? Because I liked sticking the gooey piece of gum that I'd finished onto one of the control buttons. When the next person who came along and pressed the button, they got my old gum on the end of his or her finger. Ha ha ha! And what a racket they kicked up, some of them. You get the best results with women who have expensive gloves on. Oh, yes, I'm thrilled to be going to Mr. Wonka's factory, and I understand that afterwards he's going to give me enough gum to last for the rest of my whole life. Whoopee! Hooray! Beastly girl, said Grandma Josephine. Despicable, said Grandma Georgina. She'll come to a sticky end one of these days, chewing all that gum. You see if she doesn't. And who got the 4th golden ticket? Charlie asked. Now let me see, said Mr. Bucket, peering at the newspaper again. Ah, yes, here we are. The 4th golden ticket, he read, was found by a boy called Mike Treevey. TV. Another bad luck, I'll be bound, muttered Grandma Josephine. Don't interrupt, Grandma, said Mrs. Bucket. The TV household, said Mr. Bucket, going on with his reading, was crammed like all the others. Excited visitors when the reporter arrived, but young Mike TV, the lucky winner, seemed extremely annoyed by the whole business. Can't you fools see that I'm watching television? He said angrily. I wish you wouldn't interrupt me. The 9-year-old boy was seated before an enormous television set with his eyes glued to the screen, and he was watching a film in which one bunch of gangsters was shooting up another bunch of gangsters with machine guns. Mike TV himself had no less than 18 toy pistols of various sizes hanging from the belts around his body, and every now and again he would leap up to the air and fire off a dozen rounds from one of the other weapons. Look at this kid, guys. Look at all those weapons. I don't think we'd let him in the den. Quiet, he shouted when somebody tried to ask him a question. Didn't I tell you not to interrupt? This show's an absolute whiz-banger. It's terrific. I watch it every day. I watch all of them every day, even the rotten ones where there's no shooting. I like the gangsters best, though. They're terrific, those gangsters, especially when they start pumping each other full of lead or flashing the old stilettos or giving each other 1, 2, 3 with their knuckle busters. Gosh, what I wouldn't give to be doing that myself. It's the life, I tell you. It's terrific. That's quite enough, snapped Grandma Josephine. I can't bear to listen to it. Nor me, said Grandma Georgina. Do all children behave like this nowadays? Like these brats we've been hearing about? Of course not, said Mr. Bucket, smiling at the old lady in the bed. Some do, of course. In fact, quite a lot of them do, but not all. And now there's only one ticket left, said Grandpa George. Quite so, sniffed Grandma Georgine. And just as sure as I'll be having cabbage soup for supper tomorrow, that ticket will go to some other nasty little beast who doesn't deserve it. All right. I think we will stop there, and we will start by finding out if the golden ticket goes to anyone we know. So I hope you're enjoying 2021. Hopefully the virus will go away and we will be back together soon in 2021. So just keep praying about that. Keep being kind to all the people in your house, even when you feel grumpy. I miss you guys. See you next week. Bye.
There is a special place where adults with developmental disabilities can go to find a safe haven, a place of wonderful opportunities and joy. Project ID has social opportunities, meal programs, fun recreation, career development, church services, and the largest Special Olympic team in the state. Project ID is a real community treasure. Please be a volunteer, sponsor a member, or donate what you can to Project ID, Identity Beyond Disability.